Imagine this, a young woman in her wedding dress, heart-pounding, standing in the lavish penthouse of a man she barely knows, and that man happens to be one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. Everyone thought their marriage was a fairy tale, but what happened behind closed doors on their very first night would shake them both to their core and change their lives forever. Before I tell you this shocking story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the unbelievable twists that are about to unfold. The wedding that was never supposed to happen. Isabella Hart never believed in fairy tales. Not because she didn't want to, but because life had taught her that magic belonged in books and not in the real world. She grew up in a fishing village in Maine where winters were cruel and summers barely warm enough to chase away the memory of cold nights. Her father had been a fisherman who drowned at sea when she was 10, and her mother had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. By the time Isabella graduated high school, she had one dream: to paint. She earned a scholarship to study fine arts in New York, but life in the city wasn't glamorous, it was survival. She lived in a cramped apartment above a noisy diner, often choosing between buying canvas and buying groceries. One rainy night, after a long shift at the art gallery where she worked part-time, she saw a man standing under the awning outside, talking urgently into his phone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline and eyes that looked like they had seen both war and boardrooms. That man was Adrian Blackwood, the youngest self-made billionaire in Manhattan, known for turning failing companies into gold. They exchanged only a few words that night. She offered him her umbrella. He declined with a faint smirk, but fate has a way of twisting paths. A week later, the gallery hosted a charity event, and to Isabella's shock, Adrian walked in, commanding the room without saying a word. He remembered her instantly. They spoke about art, about life, and for the first time, Isabella felt that someone actually listened to her without waiting to speak. Over the next weeks, he appeared again and again, sometimes buying expensive paintings just to keep the gallery afloat, sometimes just standing quietly beside her while she worked. Then, out of nowhere, he proposed. He told her he needed a wife for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that it would be a marriage in name only, with no expectations. She laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But when he laid out the terms: financial security, a year-long contract, and a promise that she could leave any time she found herself saying yes, driven partly by desperation and partly by the magnetic pull he had on her. The wedding was a whirlwind. White roses lined the Langston Hotel ballroom, journalists buzzed outside, and whispers followed her every move. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why her? She wore a simple but elegant gown, refusing the diamond tiara his assistant offered, and when Adrian looked at her at the altar, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. But that night, after the guests had gone and the champagne glasses stood abandoned, they returned to his penthouse, a sprawling glass fortress overlooking the city lights, and that's when the first crack in the fairy tale appeared. The truth behind the first night the elevator ride to the penthouse was silent. The kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air before a storm. When the doors opened, Isabella stepped into a space so breathtaking she momentarily forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and a grand piano in the corner, its black surface reflecting the city's glitter. But her. Oh, I was cut short when Adrian handed her an envelope. Inside was a legal document. "Read it," he said, his tone unreadable. It was an addendum to their marriage contract, a clause stating that if she ever tried to leave before the year was up, she would forfeit everything and be bound by a non-disclosure agreement for life. Her chest tightened. "Why now?" she asked. He hesitated, then poured himself a drink, his knuckles white around the glass. "Because people will come for you now, Isabella. They'll use you to get to me. You need to understand, being married to me isn't safe." She didn't know whether to feel protected or trapped. As the night wore on, they spoke in fragments, testing the edges of each other's boundaries. She learned he had enemies, powerful ones, and that his last relationship had ended in betrayal so deep it nearly cost him his life. But just as she began to process his guardedness, the power in the penthouse flickered and died. Adrian's expression darkened. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the door. Minutes later, there was a sound like glass shattering in another room, and then voices. Male, low, and threatening. Isabella's heart pounded as footsteps approached. Before she could react, Adrian was back, pulling her behind him, a gun in his hand. The intruders fled as quickly as they came, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to remind Adrian he wasn't untouchable. That night, they didn't touch each other, not out of coldness, but because the room was thick with the realization that their marriage had just become something far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The days after the break-in were a blur of security upgrades, whispered phone calls, and Adrian disappearing for hours at a time. Isabella tried to paint to calm herself, but her mind kept circling back to the question, what had she really married into? One evening, as the sun bled into the skyline, Adrian finally told her the truth. Years ago, he had uncovered a massive corporate fraud involving a multinational conglomerate. Instead of taking a bribe to stay quiet, he had handed over evidence to federal authorities. The men who broke in were connected to that case, and they wanted revenge. Marrying Isabella, he admitted, had been partly about creating a shield. The public nature of their relationship made it harder for his enemies to move against him without scrutiny. But then, his voice softened. The other reason was you. You were the only thing in years that felt real. The words hit her harder than any confession about danger ever could. That night, instead of keeping their distance, they talked until dawn, peeling back layers of guardedness, revealing scars both seen and unseen. They didn't fall into a storybook romance overnight, but something shifted, a fragile alliance born of truth and vulnerability. Months later, when the threats finally ended and the contract term was almost up,